Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you. We're going to have some fun today. This meeting is being recorded and it's posted or will be posted to the OATS website and YouTube channel for the benefit of those who couldn't attend. So just be aware of that, and if there's people that you think would benefit from the call, we can send it to them later. Welcome to the Organic Advisor Call Series. I'm your host, Sam Oschwald Tilton, and I'm the training specialist with OATS, Organic Agronomy Training Service, who's bringing you this call. I'm going to tell you a bit about OATS. I'm going to introduce our topic and our speakers. I'm going to tell you about the structure of the call, and then off we go into the wonderful world of speed discs. Okay. OATS is governed by a consortium of universities, agronomists, crop consultants, nonprofit educators, and industry reps from throughout the country. And it's fiscally sponsored by the Organic Trade Association. These partnerships are at the core of the OATS mission because we're bringing all sorts of different perspectives and people together. OATS provides science-based training for agriculture advisors. We're a collaboratively managed training program for ag advisors who work with organic farmers, transitioning farmers, and organic curious farmers. And the goal is that we help to grow domestic organic supply by strengthening the educational support network for agronomists, certified crop advisors, extension agents, NRCS, and all sorts of technical service providers. Our aim is for every transitional and certified organic farmer to have robust access to technical service expertise that provides unbiased, science-based agronomic support for their farming operation. And this is our third episode of the season for the Organic Advisor Call Series. But there's also a whole past season of the series available on YouTube. And we'll put the link for that YouTube channel in the chat right now if you want to take a look at those later. OATS also runs in-person training events, virtual courses, and publishes all manner of resources throughout the year. In fact, we're releasing a series of fact sheets and videos right now focused on organic grain issues. You can find all those in the resources library on the OATS website, and we'll put the link in the chat. So that's something you can maybe bookmark for later. If you haven't done so already, I highly recommend signing up for the OATS newsletter mailing list just to keep up to date on all these resources and on the in-person and virtual training events. And we'll put the link for signing up for the newsletter in the chat too. Okay, that is about it for housekeeping. So let's move into today's discussion, and during which we'll have the pleasure of speaking with our guests, Richard Johnson and John Findlay. I'm going to start the conversation off by introducing Richard and John. And then we'll start the conversation. As we're talking, I hope that you'll share your questions in the chat, because after a half an hour or so of conversation, I'll ask Richard and John to respond to your questions. Just with the amount of people we have on the call, it doesn't really work to unmute and ask questions while we're talking. But please feel free at any time, write those questions in the chat. We'll save them, and then when we're done with the kind of formal conversation, we'll go through and get those questions answered. So please feel free to be active on there. Okay, so let me introduce first Richard Johnson. He's a fifth-generation farmer in eastern Idaho and works for the Lemken company as their U.S. product specialist. Lemken is a family-owned German manufacturer of high-speed tillage implements, both deep and shallow. And they also just purchased Steketee, which is a cultivation mechanical weed control company. Richard grows sweet corn, pumpkins, and berries, and he's been a Lemken area sales manager since 2016. And before that, he worked for John Deere on specialty crops. So we're really grateful, Richard. Thank you for taking the time to join us and share your experience.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. John Findlay is a farmer in the thumb of Michigan, the left thumb. He operates Clearwater Farms and has been organic since the mid-90s. John grows 8 to 10 different crops depending on market, and he's big on producing for customer demand. His top crops tend to be dry beans, soybeans for food and feed, yellow and blue corn, rye, spelt, and wheat. John cultivates about 3,000 acres, has a processing facility, has a direct-to-consumer online store, and a trucking company. He's run the high-speed disc on his farm for about 5 seasons. And I've been lucky to get to know John just through different trade shows over the years. So John, thanks a lot for joining us.
Hey, Sam, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So today our topic is the high-speed disc. And this is an implement that, as I talk to different farmers, there's a lot of excitement about, and I think a little bit of confusion about too, in terms of the new capabilities that the implement offers growers, and at the same time with something new, of course, there's a big push sometimes to kind of oversell things or talk too much about what it can and can't do. And so we're really happy today to have John and Richard here and talk from their experience about what is a speed disc and what does it do. And so I'll pose questions to each of you, but feel free to kind of chime in and make this more of a conversation. If it's okay, I'd like to start with Richard. And Richard, if you could kind of start us at the beginning and explain what is a high-speed disc, what are the different parts that are engaging the soil, and what does each part do? And if you want, while Richard's talking in the chat there, we'll put in a link to the speed disc page for Lemken and also for Dagelman Proto, which is the type of speed disc that John runs. So if you want to be poking around about that. But yeah, Richard, can you kind of take us back to basics? What is the speed disc? What are the parts and what does each part do?
Thanks for asking. And the speed disc is, it's a really revolutionary tool that obviously we're not used to running a disc in the field, anything probably about 4 or 5 miles an hour because it causes ridging and unevenness and has a difficult time of incorporating things. And so the speed disc concept really is the ability of that high speed from 8 miles an hour plus. But the important thing is the engagement of the disc blades in the ground, not how they only go pull themselves in and cut and lift and throw the material, but also on the Lemken side, there's a dual angle, a direction of soil and a direction of travel that allows you to get, when you go across the field, you get a flat profile on the tillage floor as well. So
and if I could take a second, sorry, just for more visual people, you're saying that our normal disc that we're used to is maybe inclined in one direction. So if we're going this way, the discs are inclined this way. And you're saying that the speed discs are inclined that way, but they're also inclined vertically as well as they're moving through the soil.
Yeah, depending on the different manufacturers, you have different degrees of that combination. Some will be single like this. Some will be a little bit of an angle, but we have a dual angle that allows you to have that. So you got a front row or a front gang, and it's a horizontal. It's not in an offset or a tandem shape. And then you've got the back row. And between those two, they're very effective at lifting the soil, mixing it, and then pushing it back down. And the other thing is with the speed disc, especially with the Lemken, you've got like a double rollers on the back. And your depth control is actually done with the roller. So you actually transfer the weight of the machine to that roller. So you actually seal in the moisture you might have. You create a firmer seed bed, so it kind of eliminates an extra tillage pass. And the tool itself as a high-speed disc is really revolutionary because we're not looking to get in there and disrupt the soil so much that it leaves it soft and fluffy, then dries out, you lose your soil structure. These are very good at mixing and incorporating all that residue within that working profile as well.
Okay. And Richard, could you say also, I'm in the Midwest, but I know you're out, in the Intermountain West. What are ways that you typically see the speed disc being used in operations? As far as I understand, it's not as much for primary tillage. How do you see people using it?
Very good question in that regards. And across the whole spectrum of your cropping, whether it's Midwest with corn, soybeans, your small grains, your wheat, alfalfa, etc. The application there, and keep this in mind, high-speed discs come in different sizes, right? Meaning disc blade sizes. So you're going to be somewhat limited to your disc blade sizes, your working depth. One of the unique features from Lemken is you have a 20-inch blade disc called the Heliodor. And then you've got a Reuben 10, which is a 25-inch blade disc. And that gives you about a 5 or 6 inch depth to tillage. And then the Reuben 12, which is a 29-inch blade disc, which gets you up to 9 inches deep. So you can get some good primary tillage with these. But the technology with those discs is they're going through the field. They actually have the ability on their spring arms to kind of chatter. So with that chatter effect, you also help to fracture the soil below so you don't create compaction.
And by chattering, if I understand you right, one, I'm kind of thinking of like a Danish S-tine, how when it moves through, it's going to vibrate. And those discs, the way that I see them mounted on the square toolbar is they kind of have a rubber bushing around them so that you're saying when they hit a rock, they can flex up and down.
Yeah, so all our competitors use a rubber bushing. Lemken's unique in the fact that we have a patented spring arm safety overload device of about 1,300 pounds of trip force. So then you've got a spring in there that's got the ability to lift and raise just the blade itself, several inches. So if you hit an obstacle, you're not raising the whole disc. But with that spring arm in there, you get a lot more of the chatter that helps to fracture that soil. But the biggest thing is the incorporation of residue. You want to get that mixed in there, let that microbial activity take place in the soil and get going. And also we have the ability to add what we call a seed hub on the back. So guys can actually put this on and you'll have an air distribution system, much like an air spreader on a fertilizer with the tubes and the deflectors. So you can actually mount those on the machines to actually interseed a cover crop as you're going ahead and tisking everything up in front.
Okay.
So now you eliminate passes and you're more agronomically efficient in what you do.
Okay. I'll turn to John. John, it was fun learning about your speed disc experience. And if you don't mind, I'll bring up that you told me about 6 years ago you were at a conference in Canada and you were arguing with someone about how bad the speed disc is. And I guess times have changed because now you told me it's your favorite tillage tool and you're on this call series talking about it. At the time, what did you not understand about the speed disc and how does it fit into your operation now?
So a conventional offset disc has, at least in our area, always been one to bring on compaction. So we were always worried to take a high-speed disc in the field. I was misinformed, thinking it would cause a lot of compaction. And my attitude was, well, if I go slower, but my area is bigger, the high-speed disc does the same amount per hour, so there's no advantage there. And we had some pretty lively conversations, as you can get at conferences. And after listening to a few guys and then watching some people in our area, I realized it's a totally different tool. It's still a disc, but it's not a regular disc. Yeah, it has blades, but it's just a different tool, a different animal. And on our farm, it's been a great fit, primarily to terminate cover crop. And I'm going to agree with Richard from the standpoint that we've got a large single rubber wheel on the back that does control the depth as well. But that firms the seed up and seals it off. We plant later in the season. It's not uncommon for us to have really hot, windy days. And if it didn't have that compaction in the back, we'd lose a lot of moisture and have a hard time planting. So those rubber wheels do act as a cullipacker and does a great job allowing us. We've kind of coined it the perfect seed bed, and we absolutely love the job that it has after. And for full disclosure, just because whenever I'm watching one of these, I always think we chose to go to the Degelman because in our area we had a dealer. And for us, when something breaks, we want to know there's parts. At the time, Lemken wasn't in the area. It is now. And I think Lemken makes some amazing high-speed discs. We would be, very interested in one. So there's nothing, deeper than that. Just in our area, there's quite a few of the Degelman Pro Till, and they do a good job.
Yeah, good point in terms of thinking about machinery. It's not only what's the best machine, but where can I get parts and who knows how to repair it. Yeah. John, when we were chatting.
Let me just chime in. I think John brings up a very valid point, is that if you don't have a local dealer that can service and take care of you and provide the parts necessary in a timely fashion, you've got to go with the guy that's going to support you. And I think that's really critical, that whatever you're looking at doing, you've got to have that support behind you, because when you're down, you're not down on a recreational side of things. You're down on a really critical application, and you've got to be up and going. So, John, to your point, it's critical to have a great dealer network to help take care of things.
Yeah.
When I was talking to both of you about kind of the uses of the speed disc, if I can generalize, it sounded like you thought of it in maybe two different main ways. One is for spring tillage. And I know, John, you really appreciated the speed because you were saying that can be a real issue with wet soils in your area. And then the other is for turning under cover crops. And kind of question for both of you, if you can talk about how the speed disc is used for spring tillage and prepping a seed bed, and also how it's used for turning under cover crops and kind of what options that opens up for farmers by being able to manage cover crops with the speed disc.
So in our operation, what we do is we utilize this more ahead of a dry bean. And part of that is because it does leave such a good soil the field is left in really great shape. So it leaves the soil in good shape for that dry bean. The other thing is if we miss a field cultivation, it's not uncommon for us to get weeds that are a foot and a half tall. And organically, we don't have a way to control that. We have to use tillage. And what we've done is we've utilized the high-speed disc to go in there and kill those weeds that or cover crop that are a foot and a half tall. The other thing it does is it buries the green, it buries all of that matter, and it leaves a great soil to seed contact. And I'm not quite sure how it does it. Richard could probably explain that, but from an operator standpoint, it does a really good job of cleaning a field up, killing the weeds, and we will make 2 to 3 passes just to make sure we chew that up from different angles. And yeah, it's worked really well for that standpoint.
Yeah.
And in the spring application, you come out of winter time, you've got some challenges you might face that you didn't anticipate. And moisture can always be a big challenge. And speed disc, I think they give you a little more latitude in handling some of the wetter conditions sometimes because of how aggressive they are. But also on the fall season time, it allows you to really, as John said, get that residue incorporated. I've got an experience. Actually, it's one of the guys that actually bought one of the first high-speed discs in the U.S. back in 2012 from Lemken. They have an agronomist, and about 3 or 4 years ago, the agronomist, and keep in mind, these guys are in a potato, sugar beet, and wheat rotation. And so, potatoes and sugar beets, they don't leave a lot of residue. They're kind of tough on the soil, but they do 2 years of wheat, and then they go into those other rotational crops. And as they've tracked and keep in mind, this is now a 3rd generation farm. This agronomist has been there for these 3 generations. And so he compiled a lot of their soil sample data. And he says, look at what you guys done the last 7 years with the high-speed disc. Your organic matter levels are coming up. Your soil is becoming more tilthy or more mellow. And so that's some of the impact of the right way of incorporating residue, where a lot of guys don't shoot the messenger, but most times a lot of guys used to just moldboard plow all that residue under. And so you lay it in a kind of in a band, or it's kind of like a 7-layer cake. You got a layer of frosting clear down here with all this residue, but it's not mixed in with the rest of the profile. And so mixing that in there has really made a difference. If you don't mind, I can share my screen here and just give you a quick overview. Here's just a photo of a Reuben disc with a seed hub on it. But this is going into an alfalfa field that came out of winter.
One second, Richard, did you
Yeah.
share screen? I'm trying to see if I can see what you're showing.
Okay, did I share it?
So usually you got to click the share screen button, and then you got to select what tab or what screen you want to be showing.
Okay, well, maybe. Oh, okay. This right there, is that it now? Does it come up?
Give it a second. Not yet. If you're able to send me a link or a file, I could pull it up too.
So if you see here, you've got a Reuben disc with a seed hub. What they're doing, they're taking out the sold alfalfa and they're coming in and planting just a cover crop and getting it up. And then they'll come in late in the fall and they'll work that back down. And from there, they'll go ahead and prepare for the next year's crop.
Well, let's see. I think it just there. Now we can see it, Richard.
Okay, I got it figured out. So, and then I'll just share another one real quick. Like, here's a green alfalfa field. They had harvested to let it have some regrowth, and they come in with the disc, and you can see how well it's incorporated all that material. And then in the fall time, for example, this is a silage corn right here, making one pass with the big Reuben 12 disc, and then here's the Heliodor disc in grain stubble. So you kind of get a view of how you incorporate things and how well it gets that mixed in. So just some things there, just kind of maybe give some visual representation of what's going on.
You talk about You know, when I was talking with you earlier, you talked about the bigger picture of tillage and kind of the goals of tillage or having a flat tillage floor. You know, in terms of the audience for this call, which is ag advisors, how should ag advisors be thinking about tillage? Like, what are the goals of tillage? And I assume there's some times when your tillage goals do not include a speed disc. But yeah, could you give us kind of a bigger picture of what are we trying to do with tillage and how are we fitting the implement to the goal?
I think one of the biggest things we do is we farm with our eyes more than we farm with our feet and our fingers. And let me explain that. We see an implement go across the field. Let's say it's a speed disc, and we say, wow, that looks great. But we got to get our feet in the dirt and we got to dig down across that working profile. And an example I'll give you is we had a customer up the way here. He was demoing a Lemken high-speed disc and another competitor high-speed disc. And they're a large dairy. And so they spread out this big mat of manure every winter when the ground's froze so they don't create compaction. So in the fall, they go in and they'll hurry with the speed disc and go across their field. And when you dig across the profile of a Lemken, because of the dual angle design, you have a flat tillage floor on the bottom. So you dig away that profile, however deep you're disking, and you just verify that, hey, I'm getting the depth I need. And anyways, the other competitor discs, they came ahead and they did half the field. And this last winter, the guys in the manure trucks hauling the manure across the field, they got to a certain point and they came back to the dairy where the loader says, hey, what's different? Because when we got this side of the field, our trucks were bouncing. And they says, well, that's where we use the other high-speed disc. And so that's the critical thing, is you've got to get in the field, no matter what you're doing, what brand you have, and you've got to verify and check what you're doing, that not only what on top looks good, but what underneath is doing the right thing as well. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And for them, you know, they said, well, hey, the decision we made to buy what we did was, you know, the whole profile aspect. And so that was just an interesting feedback from them saying, hey, there's high-speed discs, but high-speed discs perform differently as well, depending how they're engineered and designed. So for them, you know, they don't want their trucks bouncing across the field trying to spread manure on a frozen field.
Yeah, that's a good example. That reminds me, John, you were talking about one of the limitations of the speed disc is you don't count on it to fill in dead furrows or parts in the field. Could you talk about like what are the times when you want a field cultivator or a chisel plower in terms of those big picture goals of tillage? How are you picking an implement based on your goal or what the field conditions are?
Yeah, so we're in the thumb of Michigan and we're right on the edge of where you can grow a crop. And what I mean by that is we can grow corn, but we're a mid 90-day corn, and an hour north of us, they're planting an 80-day corn, 85, 88 day. So we're right on the edge. Our window to get stuff done is pretty small in the spring. One of the limiting factors that we have is we tend not to use the high-speed disc, not because of the weight or the issue with the disc, but we've got a John Deere quad track, a John Deere 4-track that's 520 horse. That's just a lot of weight going across the field. And if we run it in corn, again, because we have to get out there so early, we get a lot of moisture in the fall and in the winter, the subsoil's wet, you can see the tracks going through not from the disc, but from the tractor. The other limiting factor is...
Oh, let me pause for a sec just to expand that, because I think I understand what is pretty interesting. You're saying in a wet spring, the disc isn't the problem. It's you need a lot of horsepower to pull a speed disc. And so when you match the tractor to the speed disc, that heavy tractor becomes a problem.
That's correct. That's correct. And we're able to use much smaller tractors and get out there in the spring with a cultivator and do a good job early on. This is just corn when the subsoil is wet. We do moldboard plow everything, most everything. It's not uncommon for us to actually moldboard plow and then put a cover crop on top of that. Or we will take clover that was interseeded in wheat and moldboard plow that in November and then go in the spring. If we have a dead furrow or even a plow that looks like it does a great job from the road, and Richard, I love your comment about getting in there and just being on your hands and knees and touching and feeling the soil. It's amazing how uneven a plowed field is. And one of the limitations we have is you don't fill in dips. The high-speed disc, at least ours, doesn't fill in dips the best. So what we'll do is we will come out and hit it. A lot of times that first time over is with a field cultivator, a lighter tractor, and then we come back and hit it with a high speed disc once it's, you know, dried off and we can get in the field better and not leave tracks. And when I say leave tracks, what happens, like right now, the corn's just getting ready to tassel. You can drive by and see the lines in the field where that high speed disc went. Again, not the high speed disc, but where the tractor itself went.
Yeah, I think that's one of the critical factors, John, is you've got to adapt to your farm for what fits best. And you know, a high-speed disc is not a silver bullet. It's just another tool in the arsenal to do a job.
Yeah.
And you know, like you say, when you do moldboard plow, it's hard to keep a field flat and even.
Yep.
But then with all the moisture, you know, what tool is going to work best without creating, and then I can't agree with you more. The biggest thing we don't want to do is we don't want to create that compaction layer that represents itself or expresses itself all season long, especially if you're on a road and all your neighbors drive by and see this. It's like, oh no, you know. So I actually have some guys, they've actually started planting with the road so their neighbors can't see down the road what they did. But it's still important to adapt to what works best for you. And there's always tools out there available. It just comes to the point of, is it economically viable for me to make a new purchase or something?
And again, to piggyback off that, and Sam, we're kind of going down a road here. We were worried about cover crops because if our window to plant corn is 10 days and we miss that window because we've got a cover crop out there and we can't get in to terminate it, now we've screwed ourselves up going down the road. And a field cultivator doesn't do a great job when you get a cover crop that's 1.5 feet tall. But what we found was if we took an 80 and split it and had half planted to a cover and half not, the field that's planted to a cover crop is actually drier because that growing cover crop is pulling moisture out. And now we can get in with the high speed disc about the same time or even earlier than we can the field cultivator right next to it that, you know, it doesn't have a cover crop. So, you know, I love the tool in the toolbox because I agree 100%. We've got so many different tools for so many different tasks. And while this is not a silver bullet, in our opinion, it's anytime you have something more than 6 inches tall, this is the tool that I want helping me out.
John, could you expand on that a little? You told me earlier about Austrian winter peas and how it sounded like the speed just kind of opened up more possibilities for you for cover cropping. Yeah, could you just say more about that example of winter peas? And like you were saying, the soil moisture.
We had a field that we moldboard plowed, and then after we moldboard plowed it, we took a grain drill out and actually drilled into that. I know, crazy. We drilled into that peas, Austrian winter peas, along with oats. Now, every year oats winter kill here. Last winter we had one snap of cold and we had 6 inches of snow on the ground, and the oats never died. So spring came along and we had a great catch. We had a great cover crop growing. We've got a young man that is working with us kind of on an intern type, and he went out and first thing he did is he collected how much, you know, we had Austrian winter peas, and then in the field right next to it we did crimson clover. So he collected samples from both, and we found out that we added about 90 pounds of N for this year into that field. Now we already had chicken manure on it, but we were adding a lot of N. And I don't know if anybody here has ever grown peas or been around them, but you can grab a pea stalk and shake it and you can see peas move for 10, 15 feet. That's not going to, and now these peas were 1.5 feet tall. It just looked beautiful. The field cultivator is not going to go through that. You're not going to go 100 feet. We took the high speed disc out, we hit it twice, we planted its corn the next day, and it's some of the best looking corn we've got. It's dark green all the way down. It looks great. We're starting to rethink, and this is one of the things that it's difficult as a person to do, but once you can start doing it, it opens up a lot of opportunities. You admit when you were against cover crops because of this and this and this, and then you find out, well, this tool helped, and now it's helping the corn, and hey, maybe this is the way to go. And before the high speed disc, we had no way to terminate that. And I would get worried because neighbors would go in, they'd plant it, and they want to kill that pea when it was 6 inches tall. I tell you what, where we're at, you're one rain away from being 1.5 feet tall. and that's what would happen. So.
Yeah, I love that example because it shows how before the high-speed disc, your windows for planting and terminating cover crops in the spring are just too short to mess around with cover crops. So in that context, yeah, you're kind of anti-cover crop because you got to get planted in the spring. But now with this tool, it just kind of changes what's possible, you're saying.
Yes. Yes. And the downside is, and I mean, I hate to say this, but I'm going to go back to what Richard said. You can't have just a high speed disc. You're going to need other tools, but boy, is it a good one to have. And I will say the other thing, we operate ours anywhere from 10 to 12 miles an hour. So there is a little bit of a thrill factor when you're going across the field at that speed. And then you get in a regular cultivator and you're doing 5.5 and you feel like you have to speed up to stop.
Let me take a moment and just remind people if you have any questions that are bubbling in your head or that you want to get responses to, please feel free to put them in the chat so we can get to them in a little bit. Question for you, Richard, kind of when John's talking about, going through a lot of residue and how that's opened up a lot of possibilities on his farm. Can you talk about how to adjust or run the speed disc? Like if I buy one from you and I get it off the truck, is it ready to go? Or what adjustments can be made or settings in terms of tractor speed, et cetera, to respond to different field conditions?
Every manufacturer has a different way of setting up their machines in the field. Lemken, first of all, everything that Lemken has through the dealer network is they're already what we would classify or field ready, basically. So very minimal adjustments. With the Lemken tools, you have a front gang and a back gang. And so with the roller being your depth control, your tires are always off the ground. So you're going to make sure those tires are always off the ground as you're working the field. The most important thing is you want that front gang and that back gang to be level. Because in order to get that flat tillage floor, you've got to have those disc blades basically the same depth. And Lemken's made it to where we have a hydraulically adjustable drawbar. So you can take that front gang with your drawbar, hydraulically adjust it on the go so you're level. And from there, you just go. You got a depth indicator gauge that tells you how deep you are. So from a couple inches deep, depending on which disc you use, all the way up to the big Reuben 12 of 9 inches deep. And so it's very simple to adjust, but the biggest factor is to keep them level. The second thing is your width. These high-speed discs, especially with the dual angle disc design, if you get into an area that's already pre-worked, it's trying to find a bottom. And so it's critical that if you have it, use your GPS, and you really want no more than about 3 or so inches overlap. Because if you go further than that, you start to create a ridge between pass to pass because it's already been worked. And then the other thing is just make sure that on the Lemken side, we have 2 other features that I think give us a little bit of an edge to help the customer get a better finish. And one is between the first and second row of disc blades, there's a rebound harrow that's adjustable. And that rebound harrow is designed to help to break up the material and then redistribute it back down so that second row of disc blades can get a cut. And so if you have high residue, like a grain corn crop or heavy cover crop, as John mentioned, you're going to kind of raise those up a little higher so the material can flow through. But if you have low residue, you're going to drop it deeper so it can really impact that material and push it down faster. And then behind the back row on the Lemken tools, we have, I call them the hockey sticks. They're a leveling bar and they're kind of shaped like a hockey stick on the left side or the right side. So as that material comes off that disc blade going this way, that hockey stick's going to push it back and feather it so it's flat. That way you get a nice flat level finish across the field with the roller. And that's the most important thing is setting your depth and leveling the machine and your width and go.
Okay.
John, what are your thoughts, John?
If I could add to that, one of the things that we found the first year we had it, it worked great. And we had a wet spring. We put way more acres on it than we thought. And the dealer told us, you probably want to change your disc blades. Well, we found out, we've got another 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch. We don't need to change disc blades. It didn't work as good the second year in a high residue situation. And what we found was when they recommend changing them at X inches, and like Richard said, there's multiple sizes, change them change them before that. Don't run them down, because then you lose that ability to, everything's measured right, and you lose that ability to really chew the ground up. The other thing we did is on our Degelman, the front had teeth in the disc blades. They were more aggressive, and the back were smooth. And that's more of the finishing disc style. Well, knowing that we're using this to terminate cover crop, as well as we're using it now if weeds get out of hand, we opted to put those more aggressive ones on the back as well. So it leaves a great seed bed, but it does help chew up that red root, or that pigweed that's 2 feet, 2 feet tall, 2 feet long, helps chew that up a lot better.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. Yeah, a lot of guys will say, "Oh, I can get one more season on these disc blades," and it's like, man. And the worst thing ever I experienced is I had a customer. It's a good friend of mine. He calls me up and he says, and it's towards the end of it's almost the end of October, and they're just finishing up a couple potato fields that they had harvested, and he just calls and says, "Richard, this disc is just not doing the job." And I drive up there that afternoon, and sure enough, I can just look at the disc blades and they're little saucers. And I'm going, "Hey, there's obvious, these blades are worn down to 22 inches. A new one's 29. You're just not going to get that job." So, always follow what the recommend. It's not that we're trying to sell parts. If you want that best job done, you got to maintain that machine and keep it in tip top shape.
Mhm. Could I ask you guys to talk about, it's interesting talking to very experienced conventional growers who are, I just learned the term organic curious, and trying to wrap their heads around organic. And for a lot of conventional guys are doing no-till. And so when they're thinking about organic, there's just a lot more tillage involved. And usually that means more tools or more implements that are needed for that tillage. And people want to know, oh, well, what's the one tillage tool I should get, or the 2 or the 3? How do you think about in terms of like a system of tillage tools? Is there one to start with? Do you think about, what's your limitation or your pinch point? Yeah, for kind of organic curious people who need to build up their tillage implements, how do they think about getting those tools, and how does the speed disc fit into that? Someday we'll have all the money in the world, but probably not yet.
People ask me, a farmer, "Richard, where do I start?" And whether it's conventional or organic. And I think the important thing is what's your highest point of pain right now? And that pain point dictates what that first foray of a purchase would be. For instance, if you, like John, if you're dealing with a high 12 to 18 to 24 inch cover crop, it's a speed disc by all means. However, if you're looking for that deeper tillage to break up that compaction layer and stuff, but still do some incorporation, Lemken, we have a line of what we call intensive cultivators or chisel plows called the Karats. The Karat 10 actually has a row of cutting blades on the front, so it does cut in size residue. And then it's got a row of shanks that are spaced about 12 inches apart that go up to almost 13 or so inches deep that allow you to really aggressively. And that's the thing, is we call it intensive because it's not a typical chisel plow and just chiseling. It actually is mixing and stirring as it goes through the field. And then it's got the roller incorporated on the back. And so you got to decide, what that point of pain is you've got to address first. And then on the flip side, you always talk about, how do I get a crop in the ground and have it seed bed ready? One of the other things, just to put a quick little plug in is Lemken has a what we call a DT solitaire drill, and it's got a row of disc blades, 2 rows. So, like John, if you've got that crop out there, you're trying to get in and you keep getting rained on, but you've already speed disced it. This has a row of high speed disc, and then it's got a tire packer roller, then a trapeze roller that's on the 5-inch spacing to come in and seed that crop right behind all in one pass. And so, I call it the trifecta. Guys out here that we work with in the Intermountain West, other parts of the country, will start with one machine, and then they'll see the impact it has, and then look at another machine. And by the end, they kind of got all 3 of those machines in their system. And several guys have said, and one guy in particular, a good friend, he says, "Richard, where I'm at now, if I didn't have Lemken, I couldn't afford to farm. it's made that much of a difference on my farm between cutting out passes, conserving their moisture, getting your beds better seed germination and a better crop. So that's just some of the interesting things of, how do you start, where do you start, and how do you end up?
In our area, Sam, dry beans and sugar beets are king on the conventional side. And both of those get worked with a field cultivator historically before they plant. So in our area, anybody that looks to go organic has already got a lot of these basic tools to prep the soil. So that's one aspect. But if somebody had to make that decision, and if you were a no-till guy, you were going into it, in our world, the only way to terminate cover crops organically is a high-speed disc or a moldboard plow. But if you moldboard plow something in the spring, you have to get a rain in order to plant that crop. This year it would have worked. A couple of years ago, it wouldn't have. So those are just some different things. Now, some guys, there's a lot of guys organically that plant cover crops and they try to terminate them when they're 6 to 8 inches tall. It's just that window is really small. And we used to do some stuff. We'd use rye as a cover, and we would go out and in a lighter field, a sandier field, we would moldboard plow it. But you just get stuck, you plow it, and then that 80% chance of rain that's coming tomorrow, it fizzles out. You don't get anything, and then you're waiting for a rain to plant. Whereas with the high-speed disc, you can hit it and you don't lose that submoisture. One of the things when we dig down, we like to run ours about 2 inches deep, and you can feel that, I say pan, you can feel the floor underneath where the blades go. And a lot of times we'll plant our corn right into that, into that soil that wasn't disturbed, and there's great moisture right there. So it has, in my mind, the high-speed disc would be, I'd say buy a brand new high-speed disc and a nice used field cultivator, and there's your tools for spring tillage.
Okay, thanks for your rules of thumb. I'm a huge fan of rules of thumb that are mostly true. Okay. Let's transition into a question or two here, and I'll ask you one from Casey Brooks, but other listeners feel free to add in the chat there what you want to hear Richard and John share some experience on. A lot of organic growers, we're always recommending that people have longer season cover crops or perennial pastures or legumes or things like that to really build soil health. And question is, for producers that have hay or pasture in the crop rotation, and then they need to get that field back into row crops, is the speed disc a good 1-pass or 2-pass tool for that? Or how do you think about transitioning a hay or pasture field back in for row crops, including not only type of tillage, but timing of the tillage in the year?
So I can share with you what guys are doing in this area. I say this area, I'm talking Michigan, Ohio. Not a lot of dairy right where we are, but there is a dairyman close. He will go in the spring and take one cutting off, and he'll get that cutting in, I want to say right around Memorial Day weekend, so he'll take that cutting off, and then that hay's pulled enough moisture out, the ground's relatively dry. They'll hit it 2, maybe 3 times with he's got a Degelman as well. Again, that's just, there's a few of them in the area. He'll hit it with the Degelman and then plant it to corn. And he's got the nitrogen there. He's not disrupted the soil that much. Most of the green is gone. You have to worry about seed corn maggot. I've talked to some other guys that have done similar things. We just got into the hay business, the forage business, and up until just recently, our plan was to moldboard plow it in the fall. But we're definitely going to be using the high-speed disc and probably split a field and see what the difference is, because we do like that concept and that idea. We are cover crops longer, the field's green longer. It's it's not bare all winter. I do see a lot of advantages to that.
Okay. Richard, anything to add, or does that kind of reflect the experience in your area?
A lot of guys here, we have a really shorter growing season in some respects because of the winter aspect, and plus some of the crops they grow, like the vegetable crops, the onions, the sugar beets, the potatoes, carrots, etc. It's hard to get a cover crop in. And so what these guys want to do is they'll actually come in the fall and work up that pasture ground first. So when it goes to the winter, it gets broke down a little more. All those root balls kind of fall apart. That way in the spring, they can hit it 1 more time or 2 times. Then they come in and plant that way. But on the spring side, I've seen the guys, up in Washington, just like John, they'll take a spring cutting off first, then they'll come in, take it out and come plant in the next crop right behind it. So you just got to adapt to what your region is capable of doing and what your crop system is. But it's important to capture that moisture and keep it. And I think that's one of the biggest things with the high-speed disc with the rollers on the back that are able to seal that moisture in and give you a good seed bed finish right away.
Is that right, John? Your point with plowing and needing rain, you're saying when you plow, you're losing a lot of moisture, and that's why you need another rain before prepping for planting.
Generally speaking, by the time the ground is dry enough to moldboard plow in the spring, if you roll that over and you're going 8, 9, 10 inches deep, there's not much moisture in that 6, 8 inches. We've always said you have to have at least 3/4 of an inch to get enough moisture to do that. And there is some spring plowing here, but for the most part, guys have gone away from it just because it's so risky. And in our weather, it seems like we have all the rain we want, or too much rain, or not enough. There's that perfect spring never happens.
We're going to get there though pretty soon. I'm sure we're going to get there. Okay. A question from Ted in Central Illinois. He said that they had several high-speed discs out to their place just to trial them, and he found that they were having trouble with plugging, and so he ran the back gang slightly deeper than the front, and that seemed to help with the plugging. And also they needed to run the Lemken a little bit deeper to get that smooth bottom layer compared to some of the other units. And he said that was 4 years ago. Maybe there's some design changes, but was just curious to hear from Richard about adjusting to not have plugging and any kind of updates or design changes with the Lemken.
No, that's a good point. So, Ted, thanks for the question. The biggest thing is to denote what size of Lemken disc he was running. Was it a Reuben 12 that's got the 29-inch blades? Because the 29-inch blade disc, you do have a wider spacing between each disc blade, a little over 13 inches. So, and that Reuben 12 is designed to go deeper and not so much shallower. Although you can go about 4 or so inches and should be able to get a flat tillage for. The Reuben 10, it's a machine that we introduced in 2018, and at times, depending upon what kind of crop systems you were going in or residues, sometimes it would have a tendency to plug. The nice thing is, there's been some changes. Our new Reuben 10 discs have a wider beam distance between the front and the back, so now it doesn't have that tendency to bridge or plug up a little bit. And it's a smaller diameter blade disc, so you should be able to get a flat tillage for it about 2 to 3 inches. And then obviously the Heliodor disc, it's a 20-inch blade disc. You can run that thing at 2 inches and bam, you're dead on, flat tillage for. But it's a 10-inch blade spacing, so it's easier to get that shallower flat tillage for with a narrow blade spacing. But when you do go wider to handle higher residues, you've got to go a little deeper to get the flat tillage for. So I hope that helps answer the question.
And I can, from our standpoint, Ted, what we've done is we do exactly that. We run the back 1 notch deeper than the front. Because on the Dagelman, that definitely seems to help.
Nice pro tip. So let's see. Last call for questions. Feel free to put them in the chat there. We'll kind of wind down. Another question for John and Richard. I think we've kind of danced around it, but I also just wanted to ask it head on. What are the situations when a speed disc is not right or is not the answer, whether it's a particular field condition or whether it's an entire farm, just, hey, this machine's not going to fit your production system? Yeah, we're talking about all the ways that they're great, but also want to acknowledge, it's not the tool for everything.
To me, the biggest limiting factor is if you've got a tractor that's got enough horse to pull it. And that can be an issue. Most guys have a big tractor, but not everybody. And some guys are running 30-foot cultivators and they've got a 230 horse tractor. They're going to struggle to get one, to get a cultivator that's going to be able to pull it that fast. The other is if you've got hills, and I'm looking at the really cool picture that Casey has there of the rolling farmland. It's amazing going downhill how much faster you can go than going uphill. I know it goes without being said, but you've got it set at 12 and you're going downhill. Well, you're going 13 and a half, 14. You turn around and boy, she struggles to get 9. And so that's interesting. From our standpoint, there's been a few limiting factors, a few limiting issues, like I said, with the moldboard plowing, stuff like that. But overall, to me, it's in the organic system, it's just a great tool to have in the box.
It's and John's right. Gravity has its way of equalizing things. So, and that's the thing is the biggest frustration that our farmers have is their operators understanding I got to run this fast, because the operators are not used to going fast, because they've all been told for decades, this is how you run this machine. And so, and hey, if my grandfather saw me going through the field with a high-speed disc at 10 plus miles an hour and seeing the dust fly, he'd come out there going, what are you doing? But then if he got out of the pickup and walked across and saw how flat and level and firm, he would go, oh, that's how that works. And so it's a whole mindset. But that's the thing is you do have to operate these at that ideal threshold, which is 8 plus miles an hour. I want to say one thing too, is sometimes Sam and John, and that is sometimes you can exceed the threshold of that disc. And I think that's where people have to understand, like we said, it's not a silver bullet, but if you try to push some of these discs too deep, even with the size of the blades they can have a tendency to start to bounce or hop through the field. And then you've just made a disaster for your seed bed. And I think that's one of the biggest things is you've got to adjust your machine and your operating speed and according to the conditions that you have that season. And so one of the things that if you try to exceed that working depth of that disc blade, even though it says, hey, I got 25-inch blades, man, I should go 8 inches deep. You can't do it. It's just going to create a mess. So, and one thing too, that Lemken, I think, helps to even that out a little bit is with that double roller on the back. It acts as a pendulum. And so I use the example of, if you've been used to those 1-ton balers going down the road, that with single axle, they'll hop. But when you have a double axle going down the road or through the field on a roller, you have a smooth level finish. And so, and the rolling hills, that's something that's also a challenge for a speed disc, because that lateral width it's a rigid machine. Some of the new things that Lemken's brought out is what we call IQ Blue contour following. It'll actually follow the contours of the hill. So now laterally, you're not just straight rigid and hit the high spot and the low spot, and then the middle doesn't get much. The middle section, the two wings will flex and follow this way. So it allows itself to hopefully help give us that better uniformity across the whole tillage aspect.
Okay, thanks for the I don't know, the dirty truths about speed discs from both of you.
Well, it's you see a lot of it in the spring on the chat boards online, especially when it gets really wet or it's really dry, and people exceed the capability of what that machine can do.
Mm-hmm. I'll put a plug in if people want to see the speed disc demonstrated at this year's Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day, which is September 11th at Purdue University, Lafayette, Indiana. We'll have a Lemken speed disc there. We'll have Lemken staff on site, and we'll demonstrate it in, I think we're doing about a foot tall cover crop. So that would be one opportunity.
Good.
Yeah, Richard, John, thank you so much for taking the time to work with me and sharing your experience with all of us on this Organic Advisor Call Series. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
To all those listeners.
Thanks for the invitation, Sam. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
Ron, nice to meet you.
Yeah. To all the participants, before you leave your desks, please take a moment to fill out our evaluation. And I'll put the link in the chat now. It takes approximately 35 seconds. And your opinions really help us improve the call series. So, for example, if there's another topic you want to hear about, if there's a better way to get you the information, that's a great way for us to find out. So if you take a moment to fill out the eval, that'll help us. And lastly, save the date for our next Organic Advisor Call Series, which is Tuesday, August 27th from 12 to 1 Central Time, where we'll be discussing business and agronomy strategies for times of low organic commodity prices. And that'll be with farmer Lynn Brecky of North Dakota and grain buyer Scott Sinner. So I hope you can join us. Until then, happy summer. Great to see you all.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.